Hello, in this video, we'll be looking at how to create custom reusable modals in React Native. We will create various types including ones for regular messages having just a button and also ones for decisions having two buttons. For all the modals, we'll handle clicking on the background so that it can be used to close the modal or do something else. Also, to make it easier to reuse the modal, we'll create a custom hook for it, and we'll talk a bit about switching themes. In this project, we'll be working with TypeScript from the start. However, if you are using pure JavaScript, you can just ignore the types that we'll be adding. Also, I'll put links to the source code in the description for both JavaScript and TypeScript. To start the work, I'll create a plain TypeScript project using Expo. So on the command line, I'll make use of the command nps create Expo app, and I'll call this message modal, and this will be TypeScript. And I'll pass the template flag here so that we can choose our template. So I'll make use of the blank TypeScript template. This will go through the process and create our project for us. With this done, I navigate into the project and then I can open it in the code editor. While it's opening in the code editor, I can make use of the Expo start command to start the project and then proceed to open it in the emulator. We are also required to install some TypeScript dependencies, so we hit Y to do that. The first thing I want to do here is to define a set of colors that I'll be using in this project. So I'll create a new directory and call it config. So in the project directory, I'll create a new directory and call it config. Now in this config directory, I'll create another file and call it theme. Now we're using TypeScript, so we need to give it the extension. So in this file, I'll paste a set of colors that I've already created. So over here, I have an object, and in this object, I have a set of light colors and also a set of dark colors. And at the bottom, I'm choosing the light colors to be exported as the colors for our app. So we can import this anywhere and have access to all these colors. I'll leave a link to this particular file in the description, so you can download it easily if you want to use the same colors in your project. With this done, let's create a set of basic components that we'll be using throughout the project. So for this, we'll create a new directory and call it components. Over here, the first component we'll be targeting is the text. So we'll create a subdirectory and we'll call it text. Now under the text directory, we'll create a new file and call it styled text. And then we also have some types for the text. So we'll create a types file here and we'll call it types.tsx. Now we'll start the work in the styled text file. So over here, we'll create a function component and we'll call it styled text. So styled text will be a function. And in this function, we'll start by returning just a fragment. And at the bottom, we export this as the default. So we export default styled text. Now to make our imports clean when we are using the components, let's create an index file in the components directory. So we'll create a new file here and we'll call this index.tsx. Now in this file, we import our style text here and export it again. So we import style text like so from the text directory, and then at the bottom we export style text in an object. Now to be able to monitor the progress of our style text here, let's go back to our app file and import the style text. So at the top we import style text from the component and then replace the text here with the style text. So we'll make use of the style text here, and over here we can say something like custom message modals. So we'll say custom message modals. Now back in the style text file, let's import text from React Native. So we import text from React Native and replace the fragment here with the text. And we'll close it off just like so. Next, we destructure the children property from the component. So we open our curly braces and destructure the children property. We can then copy the object and paste it between the text here. Once we do that, we should see the text here. Now let's style this a bit. So we start by bringing in our colors from the theme file. So we import app colors from our theme file like so. And then to the text component here, we pass the style. For this, we'll make use of an array before we bring the object. We'll start by setting a color for the text. So over here, we'll make use of the tint color from our app colors. Next, we want to set the font size for our text, and for consistency across the app, we'll take some additional properties. We'll first take the small property, and then we'll take the big property. Now using these properties, we want to set the font size. So over here, we set the font size property. And then first, we check if the size is small. In that case, we want to set the font size to 13. Otherwise, we check if the size is big. And in that case, we'll set the size to 24. Otherwise, in the case that we don't get any of these properties, it means we want the regular size, and we'll set the size to 16. With this done, we also want to set the font weight of our text, and for this as well, we'll take an additional property of bold. So after the font size, we set the font weight property. And for this as well, we'll first check if the bold property was provided. So if bold is provided, we want to set the value to bold. Otherwise, we set the value to normal. Now, in addition to the styles that we've defined here, we want to accept some additional styles if provided. So we'll take an additional property which we'll call style. Now to use this, we'll pass it as the second element in the array over here. So bring the comma and then we pass the style. Now let's work on the types to fix the errors we have here. So heading to the types file, we'll export and create a type for style text props. Now this will contain all the properties expected by our style text. So we can go to the style text here and copy all the properties we have here. And then paste them here. Now starting with the children property here, it will be a React node. So we import React node from React. So we import React node from React like so. And then we assign React node to the children property here. Now the small property will be a boolean. So for that as well, we set the type to boolean. And the same thing will apply to the big property here. So that will be boolean as well. And then similarly, the bold here will be boolean as well. Now for the style here, we need to bring in the style prop from React Native. So we import style prop from React Native. In addition, we need to import the text style from React Native. So over here, we first assign the style prop, and then we set the actual type to text style. So for this property, it will be a style property, and the styles will be tailored towards the text. So we can save this, and then we can go back to the style text component. Over here at the top, we import the style text props. So import style text props from the types here. And then at the point of destructing the properties, you can just put the colon and assign the style text props. Once we do that and save, the error should be no more. Now back in our app file, we can style the text here by applying the big property and also the bold property. Now we still have this error here because I forgot to make some of the properties optional. So back in the types file here, we don't expect all the properties to be given while using the style text. So we'll make the small property here optional, the big here optional, the bold property optional as well, and also the style property optional. So the only thing we're expecting here is the children property. If the others are not provided, we have no issue with that. So once we do that and we go back to the app file, we see that the error is no more. Now we can get rid of the text here since we are not using it any longer. The next basic component on our list is a button. So back in the components directory here, let's create a new directory for buttons. Now for our main file, we'll call it styled button. And this will also have a file for the types. Now in this styled button component, we'll first create a function component. So we'll call this styled button and we'll assign it to an arrow function. In this, we'll just return the fragment for the start. And then at the bottom, we export as default the styled button. Now let's expose this component in the index file of the component. So in the index file, we import the styled button. So import styled button here. And then in the object, we add styled button to the export. With this done, let's go to the app file and import the styled button. So we can add it to the import here. And then below the text here, let's make use of it. So use the styled button. And let's say we use this button to trigger the fill modal. So we'll put fill here. Once again, we don't see anything here and it's completely fine. So let's go back to the style button and continue. Over here, the first thing we import is a touchable opacity from React Native. So at the top, we import touchable opacity from React Native. This will be the first component that we return. So over here, we return the touchable opacity. Then we close it off like so. The next component will be a text component and we'll make use of our style text. So we import our style text component here. Now in the touchable opacity, we make use of the style text. Now for the content of the style text, let's bring in the children property. So over here, we destructure the children from the properties. And then once again, we can copy the whole object here and then paste it here. Once we do that, we should see the output in the app. Now let's style this button and we'll start by bringing in the style sheet from React Native. So we'll bring in style sheet from React Native. And in addition to this, we'll bring in our app colors. So once again, we import our app colors from the theme file. Once we have that, let's create our style sheet beneath this component. So we create the style sheet using style sheet.create, and then we pass our object to it. The first style we'll be creating is the container. So create a style for container like so. And for this style, we'll assign it to the touchable opacity here. So we pass the style property to it, and then we'll assign styles.container. For this style, we'll start by giving it a background color of neutral. So we set the background color to our neutral color, so app colors.neutral. Next, we'll set the width to 100%. So we set the width here to 100%. Then we'll align the items in it to the center. Also, we justify the content to the center. And then we'll give it a padding of 15 pixels. And then we'll set the border radius to 10 to complete the style. Now let's create a style for the text as well. So over here, create a style for the text. And for this, we just set the color to our white color. So app colors.white. And then at the top here, we assign it to the style property of the style text. So styles.text. And the color should change. Now for this component as well, we want to accept additional styles if possible. So in the properties, we'll first destructure style. And then we also destructure test style. For the style here, we'll pass it to the style of the touchable opacity. So we convert the style here to an array. And then we pass the style as the second element in the array. We'll do the same thing for the style here. So we change the styles for the text to an array. And we'll pass the text style as the second property. Now when our button is pressed, we want to perform an action. So we'll destructure this action as a property known as onPress. So with the structure onPress from the properties, and we'll pass this to the onPress property of the touchable opacity. So we pass onPress as the onPress value we destructured. Now an additional property we want to take is the isLoading property. So we want to take isLoading property. Now when the button is pressed, this value can be set to true to show an activity indicator. So for that, we import activity indicator from React Native. So we import the activity indicator from React Native. Now at the point where we return the children, we'll first check if isLoading is true. So we check for isLoading. And if this is true, we want to return the activity indicator instead. So return the activity indicator we just imported. Otherwise, we'll return the children property. Now for the activity indicator, we'll first set the size to small. So we set the size property and we'll give it a value of small. Also, we set the color property to the white color in our colors. So we reference our app colors and set it to the white color. Now we also want to take in the disabled property. So we destructure disabled from the properties. And for this, we can bring these two properties before the onPress, since the onPress is a function. Now for the disabled property, we'll pass it to the touchable opacity. So we'll make use of the disabled property here. And for the value, we'll first pass disabled from the props. And in addition to this, whenever our button is loading as well, we want to disable it. So we'll pass isLoading as a second value here. So if either of this is true, we'll disable the button. Now let's work on the types for our button. So in the types file, we'll export and create the types for styled button props. Now for this as well, let's copy the properties from the styled button. So over here, we copy all the properties here. And then we paste them here. For the children property, it will once again be a React node. So we import React node from React. And then we can assign it to the children here. Now the style here will be a style property from React Native. So we import style prop from React Native. In addition to this, we need the text style and also the view style. Now for the style prop here, we'll first assign the style prop and then we pass the view style. For the text style, we also assign the style prop and then we'll pass the text style. For the isLoading property, it will be a boolean and disabled will be a boolean as well. Now for the onPress, it will be a function. So we can use the arrow function here and it can return anything at all. So we can set any as the return type. Now these properties are optional. So we use the question mark here. The style property is optional. Text style is optional. isLoading is optional as well. Disabled is optional. But the onPress is required, since when you use the button, we want to know what to do when it is pressed on. So once we have this, we can save it. Now we go back to the styled button and import our types. So we import styled button props from the types. And then where we have our destructuring, we assign it to the styled button props. Once we do that, our errors should vanish. Now back in our app file here, we'll fix this error here by passing an onPress property. So we pass the onPress property and we can set it to an empty arrow function for now. Now let's clean up the page a bit by first importing our app colors from the config file. And we set the background color of our container to the primary color. So app colors.primary. Then we'll give it a padding of 25 around the content. Also, let's create a simple style for the text here. So for the text, we'll set the margin bottom to 20. And then we'll align the text to the center. So we can pass this to the text through the style property. So styles.text. Now we have all the basics that we'll need. So let's move to the modal component itself. For this as well, we'll create a new directory under components and we'll call this modals. Now in this directory, we'll create a new file and we'll call it the message modal. This will also have some types, so we'll create an additional file for the types. Now in the message modal file, we'll create our function component and call message modal. So this will be an arrow function as well. And then we'll return the fragment. And then at the bottom, we can export the message modal as the default. So message modal. Now we head to the index file of the components directory. And then we can import the message modal. And then we export it in the object. Once we have that, let's go to our app file and import it. So at the top, we add it to the import. So import message modal from the component. And at the bottom, just before the status bar, we render the message modal here. Now let's go back to the message modal here and start work on the design and structure of the modal. Let's start by making a few imports from React Native. So at the top, we import modal, Reusable, view, and also style sheet from React Native. Now in the component, we'll first return the modal. So return the modal here and then close it off. To this modal, we'll first pass the animation type property and we'll set the value to slide. Also, we'll pass the Reusable property and we'll set the value to true for now, which we'll update later. Also, we pass the transparent property and set the value to true as well. Now in this modal, we'll use the Reusable component here. And in this Reusable, we'll have a view. Now in this view, we'll have another view here. And this will contain an icon. So let's import material community icon from Expo vector icons. So material community icons from Expo vector icons. If you're using pure React Native, you can install this package or even use React Native vector icons. Now in this view, we'll render the icon. So material community icon. And for the start, we'll just use the information variant icon. So the name of the icon is information variant. And then we'll give it a size of 75. We'll update all these values when we make the modal dynamic later. Now for the actual content of the modal, let's import our style text and the button. So we import our style text from our text and also we import our style button. Now below the view containing the icon, we'll create another view. And in this view, we'll first use our style text. So we use the style text here. And this will contain the header for our modal. So we can put header here. And then we can copy and paste this. And this will be for the content or message. Once we have that, the next item will be the button. So we have the start button here. And for the text, we can say OK for the start. Now with this structure, let's style it a bit. So we start by bringing in our colors from our theme file. So we import our app colors from the theme file like so. Now at the bottom, let's create a style sheet. So create the styles using the style sheet dot create. This should be capitalized. Now the first style I'll be creating here is the container style. So we use container, and for this style we'll assign it to the pressable. So let's go to the top and assign it through the style property. So style cos styles.container. Now for this style, we'll first set it to have a flex value of 1 and also a padding of 25. Also justify the content to the center, and then we'll align the items in it to the center, like so. Also, we want to give it a background color to be a transparent black. So we set the background color property, and then over here we'll make use of the RGBA, and then we'll pass 0, 0, 0 as black, and then we'll give it an opacity of 0.7. And this will set the background to a transparent black. The next style we'll create here is the modal view. So we'll create a style modal view, like so. And for this style, we'll pass it to the view after the pressable. So we'll pass it through the style property, styles.modalView. Now in this style, we'll first set the background color to our secondary color. So we set background color to appcolors.secondary. Also, we set the width to 100%. And then we align the items in it to the center. I can't spell. Yeah. And then we set the padding at the top to 45 pixels. Also, we give it a border radius of 15. The padding that we are setting at the top here will enable us to see the content of the modal when we move the icon up in a bit. In addition to the border radius, we want to set elevation to 5. Now this will give us some drop shadow on Android, but this will not work on iOS. So on iOS, we need to set a few more properties just for the drop shadow. So first, we set a shadow color. And for this, we use the hex value for black, so 0, 0, 0. Also, we set a shadow opacity. And then let's set this to 0.25. Also, let's set a shadow radius, and we'll set this to 5. And then we need to set a shadow offset. And this will be an object, and it will have a width value of 0, and then we'll set a height value of 2. Now this will give us the equivalence of this faint drop shadow on iOS. Now the next style we'll create here will be called modal icon. This will be for the view containing the icon. So modal icon. And then at the top here, we'll pass this to the view containing the icon. So style cos styles.modal icon. Now for this style, we'll first set a background color value. So we set the background color to the neutral color in our colors. So appcolors.neutral. Also, we'll give this a height of 100 pixels and a width of 100 pixels. Also, we'll give it a border radius of 100 pixels as well to make it perfectly circle. Now to position the icon in the center, let's give it a justify content of center. And also we align the items to the center. Now to move this out of the view, let's give it a position of absolute. So position of absolute. And then we'll give it a top value of -50 pixels. Now just like the modal itself, we want to give it a drop shadow. So let's copy from the style here, starting from the elevation to the shadow offset. So we copy and then bring the comma and paste it here. Now to have a bit of shadow under the icon. Now for the icon itself, let's give it a color. So over here, we set the color of the icon to our white color. So appcolors.white to make the icon color white. Now the next style will be for the actual content of the modal. So create another style and call it modal content. Modal content. Now for this style, we'll pass it to the view here containing the content. So style, and we'll pass styles.modal content. Now for this style, we'll first set the width to 100%. So we set the width to 100%. And once again, we center the content using the align items property. Set the value to center. And also, we give this a padding of 20 pixels. Next up, let's create a style for the header here. So we'll call this header text. And for this style, we'll align the text to the center. And then we'll give it a margin at the bottom of 10. So at the top where we have the header text, we can pass this style to it. So we pass it through the style property, styles.headerText. Now for the actual message as well, we'll do something very similar. So we copy the style here, bring a comma and then paste it. For this, we'll change the value to message text. So we change this to message text. And for the margin at the bottom, we change this to 20 pixels. Once we have that, we go back to the top and pass the style to the style text here. So style equals styles.message text. Now in addition to this style, for the header text, we want it to be bold and also big. So we add the bold property here and also big as well to make our text bold. Now for this button here, let's give it an initial onPress property to get rid of the error. So we set the onPress property here to an empty arrow function. Now we have the structure for our regular message modal with just one button. Now let's look at the decision modal, which will have two buttons. So for that, let's first copy the start button we have here, and then we can comment it off. I used Ctrl// on my keyboard to do that. And below this, we'll have a view containing the two buttons. So we have a view here, and then in this view, we have two of the buttons, so I can paste what I copied twice. Now let's create a style for this view that we just created. So for this, we'll call the style decision row. So decision row. And for this, we'll style it to have a flex direction of row. Also, we'll give it a width of 100%. And finally, we'll justify the content to have space around it. So space around. We can then assign the decision row to our view here. So through the style property, we pass styles.decision_row. Also, let's create another style for the buttons themselves. So this we'll call decision button. So below the decision row, we'll have a decision button. Now for this, we just set the width to auto. So back here, we pass the style to the first button as styles.decision button. Then we can copy this and then paste it on the second button as well. Now for the initial content of the decision button, we want to change the first content to no. In addition to this, we want to display an icon. So we can copy the icon from the top here and paste it here. For this icon, we can first change the name to close and then the size to 16. Then we can get rid of the color totally. Also the text here, I can make it all caps just to have a nice look to it. Now I can copy the icon here and paste it for the second button here. For this, we'll change the text here to yes. And then we'll change the icon here to check. Now as we progress, we'll color code the buttons here so that they can be distinguished easily. At this point, we are done with the static part, so let's move on to the dynamic part. So before we start that, let's comment out the decision here, and then uncomment the single button that we created initially. So we'll start with the types. So let's head to the types file of the modal. Now over here, we first want to create a list of the types of modals that we'll be supporting. So to do this, we'll make use of the enum. So first we export enum and we'll call this message types. This will be an object and we'll list our types here. So first of all, we'll be having the field type. Secondly, we'll be having the success. Thirdly, we'll be having the warning. Next, we'll be having the decision. And in the situation where the decision can lead to something dangerous, we can call it a dangerous decision. So we say dangerous underscore decision. And lastly, we'll call the modal info modal. So the basic modal conveying some information. Now, based on the type of message we are handling, we want to style the modal differently by changing the icon and also changing the colors used in the modal. So for this, we'll create some simple types. First, let's create a type for the icon. We'll export the type message icon name and we can add a type to it. So for this, since we are using the material community icons in this project, the value must come from material community icons. So first, let's import material community icons from Expo vector icons. So material community, we can just copy it from the message modal here. So at the top, we copy the import of material community icon. And then back in the types, we paste it here. So to be able to get the appropriate type, we'll use key of and then type of. Then we pass material community icons like so dot glyph map. So once we do this, it will fetch the names of the icons that are available in the material community icons pack. Next, we want to create another type for the color. And for that as well, we'll export the type and we'll call this message theme color type. And this will just be a color value. And for this, we can get it from React Native and it was imported for us automatically. Now back in the message modal file, we import the types. So we start with the message types from the types. And also we import the message icon name type. And also the message theme color type. Now at the top of the component, let's create two variables. So over here, the first one we'll create will be called message icon name. And this will have a type of the message icon name type that we created. So we can assign the message icon name type. The second one we'll create will call message theme color. And for that one as well, we can pass the type that we created for the theme color. Then we can set the initial value of both to an empty string. Now what we are going to do here is that we are going to set the values of these two variables based on the kind of message we are handling. So to be able to know the kind we are currently handling, we will accept a property and this we'll call message type. So we accept message type from the props. And then over here, we're making use of the switch statement. So we'll use the switch statement and then the value we'll be switching is the message type. So we switch message type. And inside the switch, we'll be having cases and the cases will be possible values of the message type. So our first case will be the situation where we have a fail modal. And the fail modal should come from the message types that we declared. So the case will be message types dot fail. So in that case, we want to do something and then in the end we break. So for the fail situation, the icon we'll be using here will be called close. So we set message icon name to close. And then the message theme color I'll be using is our fail color. So message theme color here. And we'll set the value to our app colors dot fill. Now I'll be doing this for all the types that we defined here. So let's copy and paste this a few times. So copy the case and then I'll paste it 5 more times. So now the second one we'll be handling is a success message. So for this, we change it from fail to success. And for the icon, we'll be using the check icon. And then the color we'll be using is the success color. Next, we'll be handling the warning. So for that, we change the fail here to warning. And for the icon, we'll change it to alert, circle, outline. And for the color, we'll change this to the warning color. The next situation will be the decision. So we change the type to decision. For this, the icon we'll be using is alert, circle, check, outline. And for the color, we'll be using the decision color. Now the next one is the dangerous decision. So we use dangerous decision. And for the icon, we'll be using the same as the decision. So we copy the icon name and paste it here. For the theme color, we'll still make use of the fill color here. Now for the last case, we want to change it to the default value. So if any other value is passed, apart from the one that is defined here, this value will be used. So we change this to default. And for the icon, we'll be using the information variant icon. And for the color, we'll change it to the info color. Now one benefit that comes with setting the type for the icon name here is that when I make a mistake, let's say if I change this to closet and there is nothing like that in the material community icon, I'll get a warning to check this out. And once I fix it, the error will be no more. Now once we have this, we can copy the icon name variable here and then scroll to where we have the icon. So over here, we can now replace the name here with our icon. So we open the curly braces and pass the message icon name. In addition to this, we want to make use of the theme that we just set here. So we can copy message theme color as well. Then over here, we start by setting the background color of the modal icon view. So we change the style here to an array. And then in a second object, we set the background color to the variable we just copied. Also, we'll do the same thing for the button here. So we scroll to the button and pass a style property. So for this, we'll set the background color once again to the value we copied. Now for the decision buttons, we'll apply the color to the yes button. So let's uncomment this. And then to the style property, we'll convert it to an array. And then in an object, we can set the background color as well to the variable we just copied. Now let's alternate between these two sets of buttons based on the message type. So we'll start at the top here. And then we check for the message type we are handling. Now since we have two decisions, we'll check for both. So first, we'll check if the message type we are handling is the same as message types dot decision, or we'll check if the message type is a dangerous decision. So we'll check message types dot the dangerous decision. And if that's the case, we want to return the set of decision buttons. So over here, we can cut the view here and then paste it here. So we can go to the end of this and add the alternate value. And for this, we'll pass the styled button. Once I refresh this, it should work fine. With this done, if I change the initial value of the message types to something like decision, so if I change this to message types dot decision, we see that the modal changes to the decision variant. And also if I change this to fill, it changes to the fill variant like so. So we can get rid of this. Now one thing to know about the icons we are using here is that if you are using icons from different icon packs, what you can do is that instead of just using the icon name here, you can assign the whole icon to the variable. So for instance, you can cut off the icon we have here and then use it as the value of the variable. So in the default case, I can replace this with the icon. And then I change the name here to information variant. So in that case, instead of passing the name to the icon pack over there, I can come here and just render the message icon name as the whole component, and it should work fine as well. But since we are using only one icon pack here, I'll just undo this. And we are back to the default. Now, in addition to the message type property, we'll be expecting a header text property. So we'll expect header text property. Now, this will be a value for the header of the modal. So once you have this header text like so, let's copy it and scroll to where we have the header. So at the point where we have the header, instead of this, we'll render the header text value. So we open our curly braces and render the header text value. And what we can do is to fall back to this header we have here. So you can convert this to a string, and then it will be the fallback value to the header text. Next, we want to take a value for the message. So at the top, we'll destructure message text. And once again, we'll copy this. And at the point where we have the message, we'll make use of it. So over here, we open our curly braces, paste the message text, or fall back to the message we have here. The next property we'll take will be called button text. So button text. Now this will be a value that we'll be using in the button. So let's scroll to where we have the button. And then we'll open the curly braces once again. And then we'll pass the button text. Otherwise, we'll fall back to the OK we have here. Now in the case of a decision as well, if we receive the button text, we'll use it for the yes button. So over here as well, we can use the button text. So we open the braces and use the button text. Otherwise, we fall back to the value that we have here. So we wrap all of this in the curly braces. And for this value, we wrap it in a fragment. So we open a fragment like so. And I'll copy the closing bit to the end of the component. Now let's add another component. Now one thing you should notice is that not all these properties will be required while using the modal. So we are providing as many options as possible to make the modal customizable, but you only require a few basic ones. The next property is the alternate button text. So we can say alt button text. And this value, if provided, will be for the no button of the decision modal. So at the point where you have the decision modal, we'll use this button as the content. So over here, we open the curly braces and use the alt button text. Otherwise, we fall back to the value we have already. So we wrap the content in the curly braces, and then we wrap the second portion in the fragment. So we copy this and add it to the end of the component, like so. My app is disconnected, so I'll refresh it once again. With this done, the next property we'll be expecting is the onDismiss property. So at the top, we expect onDismiss. So onDismiss property. And if provided, this will be a function that will be called when the backdrop of the modal is pressed. So for this, we'll assign it to the onPress property of the pressable. So we scroll to where we have the pressable and pass it to the onPress property. For our next property, we'll call it onProceed. So we'll destructure that as well from the properties. So onProceed. And for this, we'll call it whenever the button is pressed, and for the decision modal as well when the yes button is pressed. So let's go to where we have our buttons. And for the yes button, we'll replace the function here with on proceed. And we can copy this and also paste it on the single button here. Now the next one we'll be looking at is the on reject. So we take in on reject. And as the name implies, we'll use it when the no button is pressed on the decision modal. So we'll scroll to where we have the decision modal and we'll replace the onPress property here with on reject. Now the next few properties will be used to indicate activity in the modal. So first, we'll take an isLoading property. Now this value will be used when the content of the modal is not ready yet. Maybe a request is being made before the content of the modal is shown. So in this case, we'll return an activity indicator instead of the content of the modal. So for that, let's import activity indicator from React Native. So import activity indicator from React Native. Now we scroll to the section just below the pressable. And over here, we'll make the check for the isLoading property. So open the curly braces and check for the isLoading property. So if isLoading is true, we want to return the activity indicator. And for this, we'll set the size to 70 pixels. And also we set the color to our white color. So we use the app colors.white. Now for the view containing the contents of the modal, we only display it if isLoading is false. So over here, we'll make a check once again. So we check for isLoading, and in this case, we want it to be false. So we cut the end of the curly braces here and close up this view. Then we can add it to the end of the view like so. So to see the activity indicator in action, we can get rid of this and then negate the isLoading here instead. Once we do that, we should see the activity indicator in action. Now we can revert this and then continue. Now the next property we'll be taking in is proceeding property. Now this property will be used when the button is pressed on the regular modal and also when the yes button is pressed on a decision modal. So for this, we'll go to where you have the buttons. And if you remember clearly, when creating our buttons, we made a provision for isLoading property. And this property, when true, will render an activity indicator. So this is what we are going to use. So over here, we'll set the isLoading property. And then we'll set the value to isProceeding. This will be the same for the single button. So I'll copy this and then I'll paste it here. The final property we'll be working with is the isRejecting property. So over here, we take in isRejecting. And this will be passed to the no button on the decision modal. So over here, we can copy the isLoading property here and paste it on the no button. And for this, we'll change the value to isRejecting. Now with all these properties in place, we need a way to hide and show our modal. So that will be our actual final value. And for this, we'll put it at the very top. And we'll call this message modal visible. Now for this value, we can copy it and then we'll pass it to the visible property of the modal. So that will be here. Now with this in place, we'll create the type for all these props that we are taking in. So inside the types file for the modal, we'll create the type. So over here, we'll export the type and we'll call it message modal props. And this will be an object as well. Now for the values in this object, we can go back to the message modal and copy all the props we are receiving. So we can copy everything here and back in the types file, we paste it in this object. Now for the first property, which is the message modal visible, it will be a boolean. So we set the type to boolean. The next property we have here will be one of the values in the message types. So we set the type to message types. Now this is possible because we define the message types just at the top here. The next property, which is the header text, will be a string. So we set this to be a string. The message text here will be a string as well. The next property is the button text, and for this property, it will not be required at all times. So we can add a question mark to make it optional, and this will be a string as well. Now the alternate button text will also be optional. And once again, it will be a string. For the undismissed property, it will be required since we want to know what to do when the backdrop is pressed. So for this one, it will be a function. So we can change this to the arrow function, and the function can return any value at all. Next will be the onProceed. This will be a function as well, and it will also be required. So we can copy this and paste it here. Now for the onReject property, it will be a function. However, it will not be required. So we change this to question mark, and then we can pass the function with the any return type. Now its loading here will be a boolean, but it will be optional. So we use the question mark, and then we set the type to boolean. This will be the same for the remaining properties. So we can copy this and paste it for its proceeding, and also paste it for its rejecting. With this done, we can go back to the message modal and import the type from the types file. So the type is message modal props. Once we have this, we can assign it to the props that we are taking in here. So after the object, we assign message modal props. With this done, we still have one error pending. So let's scroll down and check it out. So over here, we see that the error is an onPressed property of the reject button. It is complaining because we set the onReject property to be optional. So one way we can fix this is to set an initial value for the onReject property. So at the top where we destructure the onReject property, we can set this to an empty arrow function to get rid of the error. So over here, you can set the default value as an empty arrow function, just like so. Doing this should get rid of the error. At this point, let's prepare our modal for use. So we head to the app file. Over here, we'll start by defining a few states. So let's import the useState hook from React. So we import the useState hook from React. Now using this hook, the first state we'll be creating will be for the visibility of the modal. So for this state, we'll call it message modal visible, and the set function will be set message modal visible. And for the default value, we'll set this to false. Secondly, we'll create a state for all the required properties of the modal. So for this one, we'll call it required message modal props. And then for the set as well, to be set required message modal props. So use state, and for this, the value will be an object. Now for the values we'll be storing here, let's define a quick type for it. So for the moment, let's create the type here. So we export the type, and for this, we'll call it required message props. So required message modal props, and we can add a type like so. Now for the properties we'll be defining here, let's go to the types file of the modal. So under modals, we visit the types file. So over here, under the message modal types, we copy from onProceed to the message type property. Now back in the app file, we paste it under the type. Now for the optional button text and alt button text, we can get rid of them. And for the message types, we need to import them from the types file of the modal. However, we just defined and exported them here, but we didn't export them in the main index file of the components. So let's do that. So in the index file under components, we can just export all from the modals types file. Now back in the app file, we can then import the message types from the component. So we can import message types from here. With this done, we can copy the type here and then assign it to the state we created using the angle bracket. Once we do that, it will be required of us to provide some initial values. So once again, we can copy the properties in our type here and paste it here. Now for the message type, we need to specify an actual value. So for this, we can say the info value. And then next, for the header text, we can just use an empty string. And then we can do the same for the message text as well. Now for the undismiss, we can use an empty arrow function. So we can change this to an empty curly braces. And we'll do the same for the unproceed. Next up, we'll create another state for some of the extra properties that we can pass to the modal. So we'll create another state here. And for this, we'll call it extra message modal props. And you have the set as well. So set extra message modal props. Make use of the use state. And it will take an object. Now for this as well, let's create a simple type for it. So at the top here, we can copy and paste this type. And for this, we'll call it extra message modal props type. So extra message modal props type. Now for the properties that we'll be using here, let's go back to the types file for the modal. And over here, we copy from the button text to onReject. So back in the app file, we can replace what we have here with the content we just copied. Now over here, we'll get rid of the onProceed property here. And we'll maintain the remaining. And also we set the dismiss here to an optional property. With that done, we can copy the name of the type and then pass it to the extra message modal props here. So once again, we make use of the angle bracket and then we pass the type like so. Now because the extra message modal props we have here only contains optional values, it's possible that it will be empty. So in that case, we don't want to set any value at all and we want to make this undefined. So in addition to the type here, we'll pass the undefined. So in that case, if you are using the value and nothing is passed, TypeScript won't complain. Next, we want to create a set of states for the loading properties of the modal. So on visiting the message modal, these are the properties that I'm talking about. So we can copy them and then back in the app, we paste them here. Once we paste them, we have to comment them. So we start with the state for its loading. So create a state, it's loading, and then set its loading. And for this, we'll set the initial value to false. Once we have this, we can copy and paste it a few times. So we copy this and paste it 2 more times. Now we can copy its proceeding here and replace the text here with its proceeding. And we can do the same for this and just get rid of the I. Also, we can copy its rejecting here and replace its loading here with it and do the same for this property as well. And then we can get rid of I. Once we have this, we can get rid of the commented code. Now I need to refresh my app since it's out of sync. Next, let's create a function for hiding the modal. So for this function, we'll call it hide modal. So const hide modal, and we'll set it to an arrow function. And in this function, all we do is to set the modal visible. So set message modal visible, and we'll pass a value of false. Next, we want to create another function for showing the message modal. So for this, we'll call it show message modal. and also this will be an arrow function. Now for this function, we'll expect to receive a few properties. The first being the type of message. So the first property will be message type. And for this, we'll assign it a type of message types. The next thing we expect here is the header text. And this will be a string. And then we'll expect the message text itself. And this will be a string as well. The next thing is the onProceed function. And this will be an arrow function that returns anything at all. And lastly, we expect to receive the extra properties. So for this, we call extra props. And this will be optional and to be of type extra message props. So extra message modal props. Now in this function, the first thing we'll do is to set the modal visible to true. So we set the message modal visible to true. Next, we set the required message modal props. So we set the required message modal props. And this will be an object of all the properties that we received. So the first will be the message type, and then the header text, and also the message text here, and then the onProceed. And then we set a default value for the onDismiss property here. So onDismiss, we'll set the default value to hide modal. We assign this value so that by default, on clicking on the backdrop here, the modal will be dismissed. The next thing we'll do here is to set the value of the extra props. So we set extra message modal props and we'll pass it the extra props. Now at this point, we'll create a variable and call it message modal state. So below this, we'll create a variable and we call it message modal state. Now in this object, we first pass the message modal visible. So message modal visible. And secondly, we pass the required message modal props. So for this, we can copy the variable here and then we paste it here. Now since this is an object, we can spread the values in the object like so. We'll do something similar for the extra message modal props. So at the top, we copy the extra message modal props. So we copy extra message modal props here. Then back in the object, we can pass it here. And once again, we spread it. Now in addition to this, we add our loading states that we created. So we can pass its loading, and then it's proceeding, and then it's rejecting. With this done, we can spread this message modal state onto the modal. So we come to the modal here, then we spread the message modal state like so, and the modal should vanish. Now we can toggle the modal using the button that we have over here. So in the body of the onPress function here, we can call our function to show the modal. So we can call show message modal. The first property to be passed is the type of message. So for this, we use the message types and then we select the field modal. Next is the heading of the message. So for this, we can say login field. And then for the actual message, we can say no account with your email exists. Please sign up first. With this done, the next property we need is the onProceed function. So at the top here, we can quickly create a function for that. So we can call this handle proceed. And then we can just log to the console that we are proceeding. And very importantly, after whatever we want to do here, we have to close the modal. So we call the hide modal function. And then we can copy this. Let's correct this to handle proceed. So we can copy the name of the function and pass it as the last argument. Now once we have this, pressing on the button here should bring up the modal. And also pressing on the backdrop should disable it. However, if we show the modal again and we press on the button here, it closes And then once we go to our command line, we see that proceeding has been logged to it. Looking at our current setup, if you want to use the modal on any other page, you need to set up all these functions, the state, and also the types that we have over here. Now this is quite tedious and error prone. So let's move to the fun part which will get rid of this problem, and that is using custom hooks. So in the main directory of our project, let's create another directory for hooks. Now in this directory, we'll create a file and we'll call this use message modal. This will also have some types, so we'll create another file and we'll call this types.tsx. And lastly, we'll add an index file. Now in the use message modal file, we'll first create a function. So we'll call this use message modal, and this will be an arrow function. And at the end, we'll just export as the default. So we export as default use message modal. Now back in the app file, we want to extract some of the codes that we have here into our newly created files. So starting with the types here, let's cut the types that we have here into the new file. So we cut the two types and then we visit the types file of the hooks. And then we can paste it here like so. Now message types is missing. So at the top, let's import that. So we import message types from the components like so. And we are good. Next, going back to the app file, we scroll to the bottom and we cut from the message modal state here up to the app session. So we cut to where we define the app, including the message modal visible state. Now with this, we head to the use message modal and we paste it here. Now we have a few issues to deal with, starting with the use state hook. So we import use state from React. Next, let's import the message types from the component. So we import the message types from the component. And after this, let's bring in the required message modal props and also the extra message modal props. So we import that required message modal props and also the extra message modal props. Now at the end of this function, we want to return an object. Now in this object, we first return the message modal state here. So we can copy the name here and pass it like so. In addition to this, we want to pass our function for showing the modal. So show message modal will be added to this object as well. And then we want to pass the set methods for our loading properties. So starting with its loading, we copy the function and then we add it here. And for the rest, we can add it on top of our head. So set is proceeding, then set is rejecting. With that done, we need to expose our use message modal hook for using our app file. So in the index file under the hooks directory, we import the use message modal hook. So we import use message modal hook and then we export it once again in an object, use message modal. Now back in the app file, we don't need the use state again, so we can get rid of it. And now we import the hook that we created. So we import use message modal from the hooks like so. Now at the beginning of the app, I can call this message modal hook and destructure some properties. So I can destructure the message modal state and also the show message modal and also hide modal, all from the use message modal. Now it looks like we forgot to add the hide modal, so we are getting an error. So back in the use message modal, we add the hide modal to the returned object. So we add hide modal. Once we do that and go back to the app file, the error should be no more. With this done like so, we should still be able to show our modal with no problems. At this point, let's see how we can use all the properties of our modal. So to start that, I'll style this button briefly and duplicate it. So for this, I'll style it to have a background color. So I'll set the background color here to our red color. So app colors dot fill. And I also set a margin at the bottom. So margin bottom of 20 pixels. With this done, I'll copy and paste the button 5 more times. So I'll copy the style button here and I'll do it quickly. Now I'll edit all these buttons and change their colors and text to match the types of modals we have. Once I finish that, I'll come back. Okay, so I've updated all the buttons here, and clicking on each of them will give you the appropriate modal. Now we can proceed to look at our various properties. So to give us an idea of the properties that we have, let's open the message modal component here. So over here, we have all the properties that our modal can receive. Now I have a lot of tabs open, so I'll close the other tabs here. And then I'll open the app file again so that we can easily switch between them. So looking at the message modal here, we've dealt with the visibility, the message type, the header text, the message text, but we are yet to deal with the button text. So let's look at it. So back in the app file, the button text can be passed through the extra props. So for instance, let's go to the section where we have the success modal. So the success modal is the second button. And in our situation here, we have a modal for when an account has been created successfully. So in that case, one thing we can do here is that we can replace the button text here with proceed instead of OK. So to do that, we'll pass an object as an additional property to the show message modal. And then in this object, we'll specify the button text. So we set button text, and then we can set the value to proceed. Now once we have it like so, pressing on the success here, we should see the modal with proceed as the button text. Back in our message modal, the next property is the alternate button text. Now this applies to the decision modals. So back in our app file, let's locate the first decision modal. Now to make it uniform, we'll make use of both the button text and the alt button text. So once again, we'll pass an object here, and then we'll set the button text to proceed. And then for the alternate button text, we can set the value to cancel. With this done and saved, when we trigger our decision modal like so, we should see cancel and proceed as the text of the modal. Once we close this and then get rid of this, we see that toggling the decision modal brings back the no and yes buttons. So we can undo this to maintain our change. Now looking at the message modal, the next property we have is the onDismiss. This has been handled defaultly in our modals. However, if you want to perform an action before you dismiss the modal, we can do that. So back in the app file here, at the top, we can create a new function for the dismiss. So we can call this const handle dismiss, and we'll assign this to an arrow function. Now over here, we first do whatever we want to do. So let's say we just want to log it to the console that we are dismissing. So we use console.log and we'll pass dismissing. Then after that, we can proceed to hide the modal. So for instance, we can pass this to the info button we have here. So let's scroll to where we have the info modal. And then over here, in addition to the properties of the show message modal, we pass the object. And then we pass an onDismiss property. And then we set the value to handle dismiss. Now once we have it like so, we can show the info modal here. And when we press on the backdrop to dismiss it, we can check on the command line. And on the command line, we see that dismissing has been logged. So meaning that our action was performed before the modal was dismissed. Looking back into our message modal, the next property we have is the onProceed. This we've handled already, so we move on to the next one, which is onReject. Now once again, This property applies to the decision modal. So back in our app file, we can create a new function for rejecting. So below the dismiss, we can say handle reject. And this will be an arrow function once again. Now, just like the handle dismiss, we can copy the content here and then paste it. Now we can change the content we are logging here to rejecting. And then to make use of this function, let's pass it to the dangerous decision modal. So let's go to where we have the dangerous decision. And then we pass the object. And then in this object, we will set on reject. And we'll set the value to handle reject. Now when we show the dangerous decision modal, we can click on no here to reject it. And then when we check the command line, we see that rejecting has been logged. So once again, our action has been performed. It was performed before the modal was dismissed. Checking back in our message modal, we are done with the function properties and we are moving to the loading properties, starting with the isLoading property. So back in our app file here, let's see how we can demonstrate that. Now a quick way we can demonstrate this is to make use of the use effect hook. So let's import that from React Native. So at the top, we import use effect from React. And then just below our functions here, we'll make use of the use effect hook. So use effect to take a function, and then we can pass an array. Now over here, I want to set the isLoading property to true. Now the set isLoading function is returned by the modal, so we have to destructure it from the modal call here. So in addition to the values we are destructuring here, let's add the set isLoading function. And let's add the other loading functions as well. So we add set is rejecting and then set is proceeding. Now back in the use effect hook, I also want to make use of the set timeout. So what we are doing here is that we are making use of this setup to simulate a typical call to a backend API. So while the application is waiting for a response, it will set the loading property to true, and once it's done, it will set the loading property to false. So we set isLoading to false. So this will do that after 4 seconds. Now we can quickly press on any of the modals here, and we'll see that it will be loading. And after 4 seconds, the modal should come up, just like so. So that's how the isLoading property works. Now let's comment this and move to the next property. Checking our modal, the next property we have is the isProceeding property. Now this property can apply to almost all the modals we have here. It can apply to the success here and also the decision we have here. So back in our app file here, let's try it with a success. So to be able to do this, let's go to the handle proceed function. Now in this function, we'll make a typical API call once again. So at the start of the function, we will set isProceeding to true. So over here, we set isProceeding to true. And then after this, we'll do whatever we want to do here. This will typically include the call to the backend API. And then once we are done with this, we have to set this property back to false. So that will be after the API call has been completed. So we'll use the set timeout once again to simulate this effect. So let's copy this and then paste it here. So we can uncomment this and then we'll change this to set isProceeding. And also we'll hide the modal only after we get a response from the request. So we can copy this and then comment out the code here. And then after isProceeding is set to false, we can hide the modal like so. Now to test this out, let's enable the success modal. So over here, we call the success modal. And when we press on proceed, we see that we get the activity indicator here. It will continue to load until it's done and it will hide the modal. Just like so. And checking our command line once again, we see that proceeding has been logged as well. Now having a look at our message modal, the last property is the isRejecting property, and we'll do it in a similar fashion to the isProceeding one. So inside the reject function here, the first thing we'll do is to set isRejecting to true. So set isRejecting to true. After this, we'll make our various calls as usual, and then when the request returns, we'll set isRejecting to false. This is very important. So we'll copy the set timeout once again, and then we'll paste it after logging to the console. So over here, we'll copy set isRejecting, and we'll replace the call here. And once again, we'll comment out this call to hide the modal. Now we've already passed this function to the dangerous decision modal, so we can try it out. So we click on the dangerous decision modal here to show it. Now when we press on the no button here, we see that we get the activity indicator, and this will run until the 4 seconds is up. Once it's done, we see that the modal is hidden, and then if we check our command line once again, we see that the action that we defined has been performed already. Now we've seen how to use all the properties of our modal. Now let's consider how to use the modal on a fresh page. So for this, let's create a new directory in our project, and we'll call this screens, and we'll create a file in it and call this profile. Now in this profile screen, we'll create a function component. So we have profile, and we'll assign it to an arrow function once again, and we'll return a fragment. And at the bottom, we export this as the default of the file. So export default profile. Now back in the app file, let's import this profile page. So at the top, we import profile. And then just before the main return of the app function, we return the profile instead. So at the top, we return the profile. And this should give us a blank page like so. Now back in our profile page, let's import view from React Native. And then let's import our styled text and also the styled button. Now we'll first return the view component here. And then for the content, let's go to the app file and then copy the styled text here and the first styled button. So we copy the two here. Then inside the profile page, we paste it between the view. Now let's get rid of the style here and then give it a margin at the bottom, margin of 20. And for the button, we can get rid of the whole style here. Also, we correct the margin button property like so. And then inside the onPress property here, we comment out the show message modal. Lastly, let's style the view a bit here. So we'll give it a flex of 1, padding of 25, align the items in it to the center, and then we justify the content in it to the center as well. Now I have to refresh my app to get a result. Also, we change the content of the text here to profile details or profile page. Then we change the content of the button to show details. Now we have this as the basic setup of our page, and we want to use the modal on this page. Also, we can even get rid of this to ensure that we don't have any modal related content on this page. So having our page the way we want, the first thing we need to do here is to import the modal from the component. So we import message modal from the component. Now we render the message modal at the very bottom of our component. So we can do this just below the view. Or even if you want, we can do it outside the view and wrap it in a fragment. So we do message modal. Now the next thing we need here is to bring the use message modal hook that we created. So at the top, we import the use message modal hook. Now at the top of our component, we call this hook. And while calling this hook, we destructure the main values for our modal. So first, we destructure the message modal state. And secondly, we destructure the show message modal. These two are the most important and basic values if you only want to do the bare minimum. And all this will be destructured from the use message modal hook. Once we have this, we have to spread the message modal state onto the modal. So we copy this, and then down here, we open the curly braces, we spread the message modal state and close it up like so. Once we have this, we can now proceed to showing the modal. So with our button that we have here, inside the onPress property, we call show message modal. Now the first property we need to pass here is the type of modal that we want to show. And to help us with the types available, we import message types from our components. So at the top, we import message types from the component. And over here, we can state message types .info. Next, we pass the header for our modal. And in this situation, we can say profile details. So that will be a string, and we say profile details. Next, we pass the actual message of the modal. So for this one, we can say you are John Doe, and you joined this platform 2 years ago. Now with this done, we have to pass the final property, which will be the onProceed function. Now since we don't want to do anything here, we can make use of the function to hide the modal. So for that as well, we can just get it from the use message modal. So we can get hide modal from here. Then we copy the name and pass it while calling the show message modal. Now with this done, when we press on the button here, we should see the details of our profile. And pressing on the back should dismiss it. And also pressing on the OK button here will dismiss it as well. Now that's all it takes to use the message modal on a fresh page. Now back in the app file, let's comment the profile we are returning here so that we can talk about the theme. Now concerning the theme, since we define all our colors in one file under the config here, it's really easy to switch the theme. All we need to do is to set the app colors here to our dark colors like so. So I can get rid of this and set it to the dark colors. Once I do that, the app will refresh and then we'll make use of the dark colors. So if I display any of the modal right now, it will be in the dark mode. Now this is the manual way of switching the theme. If you want to provide a convenient way of switching the theme and persisting the theme throughout the app, we have a guide on doing that on the channel, so you can check it out. The link to the full source code for both the JavaScript and TypeScript version of this app will be in the description below. Please leave a like on this video if you found it useful, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.